I'm John Atack, and I'm yet again extremely and extraordinarily pleased to welcome my good friend Hoyt Richards. Hi, Hoyt.
John, always great to see you. Good to see you after a couple months.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I was going to retire. You remember that?
Oh yes, I do remember that. And thankfully you have it.
Well, I just realized I wouldn't be talking to you anymore, Hoyt. You know, that I wouldn't have an excuse to talk to you, and so I thought I'd better keep doing this.
You're a effervescent fountain of knowledge, and it would be a shame that you don't kind of pass on some of those incredible pearls of wisdom to the world at times. So I'm glad to see you haven't hung up your cleats and you're still out there in the pitch having a good time.
Yeah, it is purely and simply because I'd miss it. I enjoy these conversations so much, and I would be happier if we had rather more people sharing my pearls of wisdom.
But I think that's a great point in the sense that I can certainly confirm from my own personal journey and knowing other people like from my group that didn't necessarily take the path that I took, which was to talk about it, so to speak, and try to figure things out through conversations. Because the only thing that is definitive in that whole equation is I can certainly say comfortably that if you don't talk about it at all, nothing changes.
Yeah,
that's pretty much a constant. But if you do talk about these type of issues and that psychological process and what you've gone through and dealing with your demons, so to speak, there's always a chance that growth could occur and some healing could occur. And so I will opt on talking about it anytime rather than staying silent. So I absolutely enjoy our conversations. I've learned so much from them, and I feel our friendship's grown through it, and it's just been a win-win on every level. So I can't thank you enough for not retiring, John Atack.
But I can't thank you enough for being there whenever I want to talk to you. It's great. But it is important, isn't it, that I talk a lot. People have noticed this, and it's a process of digestion, taking information, thinking about it. By having to articulate things, by having to explain things, I often understand that I don't understand them. I get stuck as I'm trying to get through them. And so that over the years has been a good process. I have met many people who were in an authoritarian group of some kind, a cult group of some kind, and they decided that the best thing to do was to walk away from it and forget about it. And the problem is that the processes, the habits, the routines that belong to the group are then never examined. And so 20 years later, you can meet one of these people and point out that they're still thinking exactly within the tram lines that were laid down by the group. By talking about it, we're able to challenge our own thinking and to realize how stupid some of the ideas we've accepted have been.
Right.
Let's talk about it.
And that has been my direct experience, because I'm working on projects kind of investigating my own experience with the group and kind of reconnecting with ex-members who some I haven't talked to in 20 years.
Wow.
Some have taken that tact that you just described, just put it in the rearview mirror, said I'm just going to forget about it, or just paint it in a very vague thing of like, well, it was a stepping stone on my spiritual journey and I just moving forward, right? And by not doing the investigation, when I have engaged with them and just even the most simple conversations, it feels like a time warp of where I am going back 20 plus years into that mindset because it's still in place. And I think that's one of the things that's fascinating, but also tragic about unhealed trauma. I think it's very hard at first to admit to yourself that you've even been traumatized on some level through this experience, because your entry point is all about a spiritual journey, and it's going to be this enlightenment and all these sort of things. And that initial seduction is so positive and so kind of enticing that the idea of having to reframe it and say, well, actually, that's what I thought I was getting involved in, but upon further investigation, I realized it was not that. And even that thought process doesn't mean like, well, that means it's all wrong or all bad. you need to investigate and kind of pull out the good things and also deal with the things that are not so great, and then also investigate all the things in the middle, which I love to call the shades of gray. And that's how you start to make sense of the experience. But to try to paint it one way or another, that's very much falling into that black and white thinking that we've talked about, that life just doesn't exist that way. And it's fascinating for me, and I said, like, also at times depressing to see taking that approach of just putting it in the rearview mirror doesn't really seem to aid the person in any sort of healing process at all. And
no, I think there's a balance, which is, when I'm talking to people who are just coming away from the experience, I say spend as much time doing something you enjoy doing as you spend thinking your way through, ruminating and bothering yourself about the group. But there has to be that balance, because you can easily dive into the dark pool and drown.
That's very true. And the advice I was given was to use the creative arts,
Yeah, always.
From the artwork you do and that sort of thing, how constructive it is when you've had your self-esteem thrashed, which is what happens a lot in these groups, of where you really become a severe doubting Thomas of your ability to do anything sometimes. The creative arts is such a healing mechanism to recognize that you've got a point of view on how you look at the world. You've got a lens through which you see it. And that lens, when applied to any sort of creative venture, whether it's writing, whether it's painting, whether it's music, whether it's performance, dancing, whatever, ultimately, if you start to see value in what you can create, and others also recognize value in what you've created, then there's this kind of recognition that this experience, although it's maybe not the only factor, is a factor in what created this lens that you have, that you're now able to create through. And that allows you to kind of say, okay, maybe it wasn't the best experience overall, but it did give me a perspective and a point of view that is unique to only me. And that allows me to create with that a lens that allows me to be seen in this way that others wouldn't, if I can express it. And I think that helped me a lot.
With authoritarian groups, what tends to be happening is there's a merging of the self into the group, the kind of Borg of the group.
Yeah.
And so when you come away, yourself has been challenged. And the way that you create a self is by being creative. It's by finding out what's different about you from other people. It's the difference between being an illustrator and a painter, that a good illustrator knows what other people want. A good painter knows what he or she wants. And, Rembrandt was absolutely focused on what Rembrandt wanted and therefore made great art. Whereas Frans Hals made the Laughing Cavalier in the same period of time. So that finding out what is unique about yourself, and when you have to express yourself, then that will come along. That when you go through any artistic, any creative process, you are generating a self, and you can come away from, it's so often observed, somebody leaves an authoritarian group, you go and have a meal with them and they say, what should I eat?
Right. No, exactly. Yeah.
So finding out what you want to eat is a very important part of this process. And you mentioned something about, and I think you're right, it's very important that to have suffered trauma is to have been given the chance to grow, the chance to change and understand. And it's never to belittle, the dangers of trauma,
right.
And how overwhelming traumatic experiences can be. But as we digest them, as we overcome them, Sufis are said to pray for harm, because that's the only way you understand the world. Having a life of sibilant luxury, not going to do it. And so those things that have affected us and damaged us in some way are things that can then lead to growth. So I've just made your point. So I think you'd probably better riff that, really.
No, but it's
stolen it from me.
it's so true because, I think about it from the point of view of when you actually face something, it's never as bad as as the feeling of just avoiding it. That feeling of avoiding is this kind of nebulous kind of vortex that swallows you, and it's like a little Pac-Man that eats at you. It becomes this secret that you kind of hold, and we know how toxic secrets can be, because there's such liberty and freedom in just being transparent and taking ownership of whatever happened, good or bad, whatever way you want to label it in your life. And when I think about the idea of trauma and even any form of a crisis that occurs in our life, so I've learned to actually start to embrace that. And when I see a friend going through crises, it's not that I don't want to show them empathy, but I'll also kind of side that empathy with some encouragement that this is actually a great opportunity at hand, and that ultimately, I love what Albert Einstein said. He says the most important decision you're going to make is whether you believe the universe is friendly or hostile. And if you embrace the idea of a friendly universe, then anything that's happening to us, no matter how traumatic or how critical, so to speak, can actually be an opportunity for growth if you can reframe it that way. And I think that's been a huge part of one of the things I wanted to talk with today about us is, post-traumatic stress disorder is kind of thrown around a lot, and it's a very viable, real thing, and I experienced it. But there's also a term that came up, and I think it was at the one of the ICSID conferences that we were in, and it talked about post-traumatic growth, and I think that's a really important side to add to the equation. That yes, you of course need to deal with the hurt and the wounds and the damage that occurred from the events that you're addressing, but also that process of dealing with those things, and as you're saying, starting to make sense of it, is an opportunity for massive growth. And I think that's where you start to kind of are able to look at the glass a little bit more half full rather than half empty, and this moment or time or era of your life where you suffer these things can actually become a reference point that can serve you in ways that you never imagined, and actually become a point of view of empowerment, if nothing else, to say, I can't believe I got myself in this situation, but I also can't believe somehow I got myself out of it. I guess I'm a lot tougher than I give myself credit for, and I'm a lot more resilient. And I think those are great things to take away from experiences and realize that on some level, I believe, and this is, I guess you could say, faith comes into it to some degree. I just don't believe we're ever put in this situation that ultimately we can't handle and make sense of and grow from. And that's how I try to address my life going forward. And that's been a lot easier on my psyche than feeling like I'm potentially cursed and I'm waiting for the next blow to hit me on the forehead, and I think that's an important thing to think about.
I agree, and it is very much an attitude of mind that, as you say, if you feel you're cursed. I mean, I'm just happy to have a glass, whether there's anything in it or not. But wow, I've got a glass. But that attitude towards life, and I've long been very cautious about the terms optimist and pessimist, because they're both unrealistic.
Yeah.
But I do think that it is better to live hopefully, and accept. A lot of people in leaving a group, I did a video with my good friend Christian Sherko about considering the benefits of having been in a group. And there are many benefits that, for me, a lot of it came afterwards, because I certainly, in the 9 years I was involved in Scientology to the age of 28, there really wasn't that much in the way of benefit. Right. But then when I was harassed and sued and all of this, my resilience actually went up tremendously. That I was a relatively shy person, and Scientology did nothing at all really to help that. Then after I left, I got used to the idea of going on stages and talking and having cameras thrust in my face, and until it's a joy now. I love going on stage. It's brought out that part of me. I don't get nervous about it. I just love talking to a group of people. And as a kid, I played in bands, I played drums and sang, and you like that thing of having an audience that are with you. But to actually be up on stage and be able to answer questions from people and lighten the mood, because which I think is an important part of this whole process. Understanding, yes, we're here for a certain period of time, and in this period of time, we're going to we can have a rotten bad time, we can have a reasonably good time. But yes, and even as a teenager, I picked up this word ameliorate, to make something better. And it struck me that while I probably wasn't going to make anything perfect, I could try and make things better. And then I got this word altruism, this idea of doing things for other people, and the word compassion, these lovely ideas that, in fact, at age 66, add up to having had a life that feels successful. Not when you look at my bank balance, sadly, that's not too great, but that I do feel, and from the feedback I get, that by focusing on what's good for people and what's good for me, not some self-sacrificing thing, but by looking to how can we make this situation better, that often those things which were damaging to us, harmful to us, actually now present another face, and we are able to take the experiences. I think very much, and the first thing, I saw an interview you did with Steve Hassan, that was the first time I met you, and you said that you considered that having been involved in a cult was a badge of honor. I loved that thought, that because obviously if I tell, if I want people to have a negative attitude towards me, all I have to do is say I used to be involved in Scientology.
Right, of course, right.
And they know that I'm a complete half-wit, not to be relied on for anything. How could you be so stupid? But the reality is that when you come out from this situation, for me, that's 38 years ago, so I've had a lot of time to ponder on it. You have been given a skill set. You've been given tools. And you can, if you have the humility to accept that you weren't that bright, and to this day I'm not that bright, but that you now know something about how people are persuaded and how readily that occurs. I mean, the thing I really know is that those people who reckon they're invulnerable are the very people. I had a friend who came to me and he said that nobody could ever talk him into a cult. I said, how long have you been smoking cigarettes? Doing something that, why are you doing that if that's not a cult? What is the benefit of smoking cigarettes? It's a cult activity. And there are lots of you out there doing it, damaging your health and boasting about it. It's very much a matter of, am I capable of being sold on doing something stupid? Yes, I am. And where can I go from that? The other point you mentioned was, which I think is very valid, is about friendship and the friendships that you develop within the group, and how real those friendships are. And I will tell an illuminating story, if you'll permit me.
Oh, please.
The reason I left Scientology, and I've now named a name, so I can do it again. My good friend Ira Chalef, who I've known since 1977, and who is a remarkable man who I admire tremendously. I was summoned in to Scientology in the spring of 1983 by an ethics officer. And I was told I'd got to come in. It was vitally important. The ethics officer was a man called Peter Shantz, who I don't think is any longer with us. And he said, our friend Ira had actually been doing some work for my little artist agency. So, he was on a leave of absence from Scientology's C organization. And this guy, Peter Shantz, said that this is worrying because it looks as if he's going to be declared suppressive.
Looks like it could be, right?
It looks like it could be. And so I said, well, what are we going to do about that? And Peter said, well, this is terrible. We'll fight it all the way. A week later, I didn't know Peter Shantz, but he'd known Ira for years. And a week later, he called me back, and again, I had to trug all the way down to St. Hill Manor and go and see this chap. And he said, he's been declared suppressive. And I said, what are we going to do about it? And he said, these people, they can be so tricky, they get away. He'd known Ira for like 10 or 15 years or something. The week before, he was all for defending him. And I said, well, where's the proof that he's suppressive? He said, oh, his name is on a list. So there's a friendship for you. That's all it had taken. And it was against all of the policies of Scientology. You weren't meant to be able to just put names on a list. You were meant to have a court of ethics or a committee of evidence. And they were meant to be, you charged the person, you gave them the chance to answer. It was all in the written justice system of Scientology. It all looks very nice. The reality was his name went on a list, and he was thereafter persona non grata. He was to be shunned and sent to Coventry. And so what appears to be friendship within the group and this tremendous loyalty, which goes lifetime after lifetime, right, according to Scientology, thousands of lives of fighting the good fight in a moment. And I would suggest that in authoritarian groups, there is no such thing as friendship.
Yeah, and I would concur. And it's not something I framed in that way until very recently, when I had a conversation with someone where they were actually, we were talking about my experience, and we were talking about trying to measure some of the positives that might come out of the experience, because as we talked about ad nauseum, it's so important to kind of give both sides, right? That there were always some positives of why you get involved, and ultimately at some point the negatives start to usurp the positives, and that's ultimately when you start making your way out of it in some capacity. But so under that guise, she was asking me, well, you must have made some great friendships in the group. And, and rather than just answer yes immediately, I really gave me pause. I'm like, well, let me think about that, because as you're saying, I really realized that friendship was not conducive to the environment that was created. There was such a watchdog mentality, in the sense that you had to watch each other. And in that realm, there was always going to be an event where someone would be, as we call it, put on the hot seat, in a sense, where you're basically put down, and then mob rule comes at you, and basically whatever behavior you've been displaying that's been out of alignment with the principles that we're living by, whatever BS you've anointed it to be, this person's in essence getting attacked, and you're expected to pile on. And very often the things you pile on with are, maybe you had a kind of heart-to-heart conversation with this person about something that they were struggling with, facing some sort of doubt, and confided in you. And then you completely sell them out just to save your own ass, because if you don't contribute to basically throwing a stone during the stoning period, then the mob can turn on you. And that whole environment is just not conducive to friendship at all, because friendship is truly earned by not doing things like that, right? If someone speaks to you in confidence, you treasure it, and you are very discreet with that. And I think likewise, there's this, and if you had asked me back then, I would have said, oh yes, these are my friends, these are my brothers and sisters, our spiritual family, we've been through lifetimes, and we're going to do great things, and all of that. But that's all this kind of inherited speak and mentality that happens once you get indoctrinated into it. It's like, without question, you have this like-mindedness, and there's an affinity to that. Like, you're all drawn in for a lot of the same reasons. I feel like in my group there was a lot of true sincerity with people who got pulled in, and that was one of the hooks that was used to manipulate them by, that they were actually wanting to become better people, wanting to become more enlightened on some level, and just be a better version of themselves. So all of that's great, but when you actually look at the time spent in the group, once you kind of bought into the pitch, and you've kind of been anointed and come in, and now you're one of us, then it becomes this whole thing of, well, now that you're one of us, we're all the real friends, and this is the only thing that really matters to you. But none of that's been earned on any level. And like I said, the behavior that then happens in the group is also not conducive to having that friendship grow or be nurtured. And ultimately, the only friendships I've actually built out of my experience in that group with the individuals who were in that group are ones who've come out like I have and have been willing to talk about it. And that's where the friendship really began, was dealing with the aftermath and the carnage that kind of occurred in the group. That's when the friendship actually started to have the opportunity to actually find some footing. Yeah, that, you know, and I've heard some people who say they have made some friendships in their group. So maybe they have different dynamics than what I found in my group. But boy, for me, it was certainly in accordance with what you're describing. I did not make friends in that group. And you could actually say to yourself, and I've thought about this as well, if I wasn't in this group and I met these people, would they have been my friends? And I think more often than not, the answer would be no.
Mm.
And that's just a harsh reality of it to it, really.
And I think there is a level of loyalty. I think loyalty is a very incredibly important concept. That the loyalty that I feel towards my children, the loyalty that I feel towards my siblings. I have 3 brothers, and you know, their children and my parents. That is an inviolable loyalty. That there is nothing that could break that. I would never knowingly betray or harm my children, my siblings, or my late parents, the memory of my late parents. And the thought that, you know, in a single breath, somebody can, you know, turn on somebody in Scientology, and I never found myself all the way into this mentality. But the idea is that if anybody tells you anything that's in violation of a Scientology principle, so for example, if anybody said that they thought that L. Ron Hubbard wasn't a good-looking man, then, you know, even something that trivial, and we were a lot ruder about Hubbard than that, I must say.
Right.
You were meant to write a knowledge report, an ethics chit, and
the KRs, right? Yeah,
that's it, the knowledge report, the KR. And the idea is, you know, in my whole time in Scientology, I don't remember writing any. I was there for 9 years, but because it just seemed such a despicable thing to do, to be spying on people. Yeah. If I had a problem with a person, then I would say, this is a problem for me, and talk about it. But and I didn't have many written about me, actually. It's, you know, their thing is that you'll find out who the suppressive person is because I have a great fat ethics folder. Well, I didn't. I had commendations for various things I'd done. And I think in 9 years, I've accumulated 3 knowledge reports. That was, you know, so I wasn't really evil enough. But that you will sell out your friend because the dogma, the doctrine becomes more precious to you than the relationship. And that's, for me, is the revelation of life, that I do not seek enlightenment. I seek to be a good friend to those people who I choose as my friends. You know, for a long time, I struggled with a terrible thing. In 1991, I went out and did a formal intervention with Hannah and Jerry Whitfield. And it was awful. It was it was the most traumatic thing that had ever happened to me. We were followed by 7 carloads of Scientologists. You know, they had an PI over from Las Vegas. The police, we reported the police as kidnappers. I had to deal with all of that. It was really traumatizing. And when I got home, I think I realized for the first time what it had been like for people who were in Scientology's C organization, who were sleep deprived, who were bullied, who were not allowed to complete things, you know, were forced from one place to another. This had never happened to me when I was involved. I had a really cushy life because they decided under Ron Hubbard's interpretation that I was a celebrity. I wasn't earning any money, but, you know, I painted, I played drums, I wrote novels and things like that. And so I was treated with kid gloves, and I didn't have that treatment. So for the first time, I'd been sleep deprived. I'd had all of these horrifying, you know, all this pressure coming around me. And I found myself suddenly questioning a foundational assumption of my life. You know, so I'm, you know, what, 33 years old. And I realized that right from infancy, I have believed that we should love everyone. This is what I was taught by my mother, who was a Christian. This is what I was taught in church and in school. In school, there didn't seem to be a lot of love going around. But I, you know, to become really, to be a decent human being, I had to love everybody. And the very thought of questioning this made me dizzy. It was awful. And at that point, I wrote down this notion of the unquestionable assumption. And these were the things I wanted to find inside myself. What was it that I was thinking that was, oh, you don't need to question that. And I thought about that for 3 or 4 days. Do I have to love everybody? And I decided I don't. That there is absolutely no obligation for me to love everybody. And it's a stupid idea because it will not only endanger me, but it will endanger those that I'm trying to help, because I will find myself enabling psychopaths, malignant narcissists, and dangerous people, just as I had done by giving money to Scientology, in fact. And so I decided that I would pull back one to the Hippocratic oath and say, I won't deliberately harm anyone. And that's been my process since then. But to create those loving relationships where, I absolutely would view you and my other friends as siblings, as brothers.
Right.
And so if somebody's going to interrogate me about you, then I have to have a very good idea of why I should be telling them anything. I'm reading Jordan Peterson's astonishingly foolish 12 rules of life. And one of them is you never lie. Rule number 8, never lie. And you're going, so if Anne Frank is in the loft of your house, you've got to go and tell the Gestapo.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I'm afraid that sometimes loyalty means being quiet about things.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so wonderful you bring this up, because the concept of friendship has been such a critical facet of my life. And for me, the touchstone moment that I really felt like I started to understand friendship actually was, I think I told you I spent a year going to taking my A-levels in England, So I was the only American in the school. It was at Haley College up in Hertfordshire, beautiful place. I think they've shot it for some of the Harry Potter movies. It's just picturesque. It's a classic English public school, right? But I was, as you can imagine, very much a fish out of water. And by absolute grace of the house that I think there were a number of houses. I can't remember how many houses there were, but it was largely an all-boys school. It had only recently turned to girls in the last few years. So it's like 550 boys and 50 girls. And it was from age like 8 to 18. And so one of the guys in my house, Allenby, was this guy, James Brotherton. He was an athlete, and I was learning to play rugby and that sort of thing. And he very kindly kind of took me under his wing. And he had a very tight group of friends, that was like another 6 of them. And just by this opportunity of being in the house with James, he introduced me to his friends. And they put me through a kind of a trial period to kind of earn, an acceptance into this group. And the most effective technique they had was I had to use the F word, and that was feel. I had to actually talk about my feelings to them, which sounds like not a big deal, but as an American, we'd never talked about our feelings, first of all. And I think you would even say a lot of Brits don't do that potentially, but because of the nature of the boarding house dynamic, a lot of them had known each other since they were 8, and they kind of grew up with this fraternity where they had to kind of entrust each other with these feelings, and it built this brotherhood, which I never really quite understood until I met them. And I could see their approach to the relationship, as which we would all term friendship, was one that was taken very seriously, because they considered it to be like a lifelong commitment. Like if you are my friend, you're going to be my friend for life. But it was based on you, A, earning it, and B, kind of backing up and doing the things that friends should rightfully do to one another and look out for each other. And that year transformed my perception of what friendship could be and would be, because ultimately I'm still incredibly tight with this group of friends. We, now that we're all older, a lot of them got married and had kids. And so the kids have grown up enough so that now we have a little bit more free time, and we try to pick somewhere in the world that we meet once a year, and we all kind of get together for like a week or 10 days and just reconnect. And it's just been a gift that has just kept giving and giving and giving. So I always fell in love with the idea of having those types of relationships. And I felt that of the relationships in my life, romantic versus friendship, I've been much more successful with the friendships than I've been with the romances. And but it's given my life such vitality and such a feeling of camaraderie and not being alone, and having this kind of safety net that you can lean on at times. And it's been so valuable. And that experience, when I look at that and I look at the friendships I've had and still have in my life and compare it to those relationships I was supposedly inheriting when I got involved with my group, Eternal Values, it just, they're diametrically opposite, you know, in the sense of there was an expectation in the sense that you've arrived here, you've now been accepted, therefore you inherit. Every one of these people are now your friends in this group now. You're supposed to have, exactly like you said, this extreme loyalty to them all. You talk about unconditional love for each other and all these sort of things, which in concept all sound fantastic. Sounds fantastic, but in execution didn't in any remotely resemble that. And like you said, if someone left or got, you know, kicked out or escaped like I did, you demonize them. You know, whatever happened, what happens to the unconditional love? What happens to the loyalty to this person? And oh, maybe they're just misunderstood and maybe we can help them out. No, the moment that person's made that decision, it is like the wrath of fury of Hell's Gates comes down on them, and it is accepted as completely acceptable behavior, when all you've been championing and talking about is this kind of unconditional love and loyalty you have for each other. So it was just such absolute hypocrisy. And yet when you're in it, you know, it's one of the parts of my life that I kind of struggle with and have regrets of just going along with that kind of, you know, behavior for so long. It's not comfortable to know that I, you know, even having been exposed to great friendship and then getting involved in this group and thinking I was doing that again, and clearly it was not that. And even to the point of where just literally a couple of days ago, until this person kind of asked me that question, where I really thought, God, I really haven't even framed it correctly to really assess it in that light as much as I could, to say I really wasn't making friends in that group. That you know, almost 20-year experience, I certainly, you could say, you know, I pulled some friends into the group, and those friendships I still, you know, and even though I may not talk to those people because they're still indoctrinated, I still love and care about those people, because I really treasure that friendship we had going into it. Now, what happened in the group is where everything went sideways. But the fact that they're still, you know, I'm still hoping and pulling for them that maybe they'll awaken on some level and we can rekindle that friendship. But the truth is, I didn't make any friends in that group, and that's been really kind of enlightening and mind-blowing for me to kind of accept.
I mean, I'm fortunate in that I did make some friends in the group, and I'm unfortunate in that some of them I haven't seen now for 40 years. And it still tugs at my heartstrings. There are a few people that we laughed a lot together, which is a good thing to do. And that those people are now, I think it was probably during the Russell Miller court proceedings, the attempt that Scientology made to stop publication of Barefaced Messiah, the excellent biography of Ron Hubbard. And because I was the expert witness in that case, and indeed had been the researcher for the book, though, you know, fully half of it, Russell and his wife Renata, was material they brought, but half of it was from me. So I was the expert witness. In fact, all of the documents that were questioned had come through me to Russell. And there are these affidavits from people I'd known when I was involved in Scientology, pretty much saying what a terrible person I was, which may be true, who knows? And I don't think so. But there was just one among them, and she had been a really dear friend. That was my feeling. When I first got in, she was the first person I spoke to when I turned up at Scientology. And we'd stayed, you know, through the 9 years I was involved, she had less and less time because she joined the C organization. So I didn't really see her during the last 5 years of my membership. But I was very touched that her affidavit was the only one where she basically said, we were really good friends, and I really respected him. She said something positive, and it was realizing that everybody else had sort of gone with the cult think, and they that was how it was for them. The friends that I have who were Scientologists are largely people that I met after leaving Scientology, people who, had a similar interest to my own in understanding what had happened to them. And thankfully, all of the people I recruited, and I probably recruited 12 or 13 people over the years, none of them stayed. Yeah. And, within a month of my leaving, there was nobody left in that I'd been involved in recruiting, which is a little bit of a relief. Talking with Sarah Edmondson and finding that she reckoned to have recruited, I think, 2,000 people over the years. But I think she's done more than enough to pay any debt incurred there. Quite remarkable woman.
Yeah, she's terrific. But I think that's such a I think that's part of the recovery path. One of the more devastating aspects of it is that feeling of betrayal from these people that you consider to be your friends, and I think like this is the growth part of the PTS, that to start to reconfigure and reframe these experiences, saying, and as we're talking right now, were they really friends of mine? Like the fact that they betrayed you is a big indicator, probably not. But then you can say, well, maybe they're still caught up in the cult thing, and it's not so much because I certainly know I piled on and threw rocks at people, and just to save my own ass in those situations. That did things. There are plenty of things that people would say, well, how good of a friend were you? And I wasn't in those. So I'm guilty as charged as anyone would be. But ultimately, this process of starting to look at the experience and get over just the initial reaction of, I can't believe this my friends did this to me. You have to go that further, level and say, well, wait, did we really have a friendship in the first place? And that's where the healing starts to take place, and that's where the growth starts to occur, when you start to kind of just reassess. And it's something that is ongoing. I mean, it's one of the things sometimes Steve Hassan and I work on cases together, doing some things, trying to help get people out of these cultic situations. And I think we have slightly differing takes on the recovery process, because he was in for a couple of years and learned quite a lot and feels like he kind of healed pretty quickly. For me, it's been ongoing. Like it's an ongoing experience. When I'm telling someone who's pulling themselves out of a group and what the recovery process is like, I try to be as transparent, saying there's no guarantee that you're going to connect these dots and you're going to go back to the life that you had before. I go, for me, it doesn't work like that. This needs to be incorporated into your life and become a facet of it. Not that you want to be defined by it, but it becomes this potential reservoir for you to keep learning from, literally, I think, for the rest of your life. So it's not going to be this thing you're going to just get past and say, okay, that was a chapter and move forward. It's really this thing of embrace the idea that you're talking to someone who's been out for 2 decades and still feels like I learn every day something new about that experience to reframe and grow and learn from. And if you can embrace that process, then I think you're in a great tact. Don't let that scare you off of thinking that, that there's no timeline where you can say, oh, I can put it to bed. I said, why would you want to put to bed something that potentially continues to teach you? I said, embrace it, and I think that's a really interesting way to look at it,
I think it is, and I think it's the best way to look at it, that we are constantly developing. We're constantly evolving, and that may mean, that 40 or 50 years after the fact, you can realize that there's a nuance to something that happened to you or to something you thought or did that gives you a greater understanding of it. I'm told that Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, pointed out that it's often where you're thwarted in life. In fact, I think he said it's generally where you're thwarted in your intentions that you actually learn something, that some process occurs in your life that will be transforming. So it's not what you think you need or should have. It's often something that got in the way and that pushed you onto, the opportunity you wanted was gone, so you had to do something else. In those terms, I had absolutely no intention of being a cult buster, of spending my life thinking about Ron Hubbard or all of this. And here I am, I did have I had 17 years where I was not involved in any of it from 1996 onward. And I've come back, and my main work is around authoritarianism in general. But because I'm seen as the man who, dug into the life and times of L. Ron Hubbard and found these things out, that is my reputation. And when people ask me, I'm introduced as an ex-Scientologist, I'm sort of going, well, I have a bit more of an identity than that, I think.
No, it's interesting about you say that, because I was watching, it was a documentary about Tina Turner, and she was such a linchpin for so many women talking about domestic abuse, and
yet she was involved in Nichiren Shosu.
Oh, what's that?
The Japanese Sokogakai Nichiren Shosu, where you pray to a Gohonzon, a scroll, and so she was a long-term member of a fairly serious authoritarian group.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Well, they didn't get into that aspect. They definitely talked about her Buddhism faith and that sort of thing.
Well, Nichiren Shosu claims to be a form of Buddhism. It's actually a worship of a character. So I'm not willing, but they're very powerful. They have MPs in the Japanese Parliament. Right. They're not seen as negative. They're not seen as much as they were. But in the late 70s, they were listed alongside the Moonies, Scientology, the Way International as a significant cult. And she was a member.
I'm not surprised. It's probably, it's a way to try to offset the abuse. You're kind of drawn to.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, so it makes sense to me. But in this documentary, what's fascinating was she, so she had this relationship with Ike, who was very abusive and all these sort of things. So they graphically described that. But she, not unlike what you're describing, that was early in her career. Then she goes on and becomes this massive, rock star, right? In her 40s and 50s, like it's unheard of. Not only just being a woman, but just at that age, just, coming into her time and later in life was amazing. And so she was frustrated that so many people still identify her from this period of the abuse and want to bring and make that be the label they want to talk to her, because she really was like one of the first true activists that made that issue so aware for so many people. And you can see the resistance that she felt, because she's like, well, that's not the only thing I did. Like, look at this career I had and the frustration. But I can also see the other side of where, but people are so grateful for her because she provided a voice for them when so many didn't feel they had one. And so I can see what you're talking about is in the same way. I don't want to be just known as the ex-Eternal Values cult leader. That's all cult member who was able to get out of it and talk about it. I don't want that to be the only thing, but I do embrace the fact that if that part of my life has affected people and that's what they remember most because it in some way assisted them to learn something about themselves, then I just try to embrace it. But it does, I don't want to be, as you're saying, I don't want that to be the only thing on my definition of what people see me as. But sometimes you can't control how the world takes it in, and I thought that was a fascinating thing to look at her life, that you could see, even though they were doing this documentary about it, she's like, well, why are you talking about that part? That happened 30, 40 years ago. Like, look at me now. And I think when you make that much impact on people, whatever point of your life, it's going to be something they're always going to remember. So I take that as a badge of honor, John.
Yeah,
another badge of honor.
I am saying that I'm I'm satisfied with the life I've led, with where I've arrived. Now, that satisfaction in part is because I really know I can rely on my friends.
Yeah.
I have many close friends, and I have been pushed into extreme circumstances where those friends and my family stood by me no matter what. And that's gratifying, and it gives me that sense that it is the quality of our relationship. And maybe for people saying, look, it's very simple. There's this thing called society, and you can be pro-social, you can do something for the good of society, you can be asocial, you can seek not to be involved with society, or you can be antisocial. And I fear that a great deal of what is being taught in our society is antisocial, because it is about how to be selfish. It's about how to get things that you want. And I don't believe that there's any conflict at all. It's perfectly possible to have, a good and fulfilling life without having sacrificed yourself, done the St. Francis and carried all those stones up the hill.
Right.
Apologized to your body, the donkey, at the age of 44 for having killed it. He's a fascinating character, I must say. And maybe that degree of self-sacrifice is virtuous, but probably in his case it was. But I don't think that's the way we should be going, to sacrifice ourselves to the juggernaut, to the great idol of Krishna. We should be creating relationship, and we should be looking after ourselves, looking after society, and that's being pro-social. And it just seems to me that being pro-social means having a friendly attitude. It's not only thinking the universe. I'm not sure the universe is either friendly or hostile to me. I do have to dodge every now and then as it throws things at me. But being friendly towards, you had some guy commented on the channel that why was I worried about human beings being wiped out in the next 200 years, when obviously the whales are a much more important species. They're much better. They're much nicer. And it was an interesting comment. I too am keen on the cetacean species and very interested in their incredible vocabularies. That dolphins have, I think, 400 phonemes, 400 noises they can make. Human beings, all human languages fit within 40 sounds, 40 phonemes.
Wow,
I think 28 in English and 28 in Chinese. That's the most you get. And 4 of those 40 are palatal clicks that are only found in the Zulu languages. So they've got a lot more noises they can make. And they can do all sorts of wonderful things, like doing a sonar scan of another dolphin and playing it back to it so that it doesn't have to be coded and decoded. It's like, you've got a lump there, mate. Nothing you can do about the lump, because there's the problem of not having opposable thumbs that cetaceans suffer from. It's also sad to say that rape is a commonplace in the dolphin species. So I'm afraid their pro-social activity, I know they look like they've got a big grin going on there, but it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing.
Right.
I do believe the human species is incredible and wonderful, and I exalt in the cathedrals and the symphonies and the ballets and the just amazing things that human beings have done, the works of Rembrandt and Velázquez and all this. But I do believe that our relationship to one another is the most important thing that we have, and that if we betray that, then we have failed as human beings, and we will experience that failure. I am a very happy person, and I went through truly dreadful times when an organization with $2 billion and 40,000 members decided to destroy me, and set up 16 years of seeking to do that. And it was very much me versus them, because people didn't want to speak out against Scientology, because look what happened to John Atack.
Yeah, right. No, I get it.
Nowadays we've got anonymity on the internet, and so as Arnie Lemmer said, before the internet and safety in numbers, there was John Atack. But I'm the other side of that, now that that Scientology doesn't particularly bother to harass me because they've got important people like Leah Rimini and Mike Rinder and Tony Ortega to deal with out there. So they're too busy with that. And they're collapsing, of course, which is a good thing. Hopefully there will be people to help the people that come out. That's my worry. That's the most important thing to me. But I have a very satisfying life, you know, like you. My romantic life was difficult, and I now have a fantastic partner for the first time in my life, and I have these remarkable friendships, and it is by extending friendship and by Eric Fromm said that love is care, concern, responsibility, and knowledge. And I think that the care we have for others, the concern we have for others, care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge. That's the definition of friendship. We have care, we have respect, we take responsibility, and we seek to have knowledge, which we share and make available to each other. And that leads towards a good human society, a civilization, which I differ, I know, from most people that I talk to. I do feel very hopeful about the human future. I do feel that we have the tools. And I think the most important set of tools that anybody has is to do with the problems of coercive control, the problems of authoritarianism. Because what's wrong with society is the bullies and the people who are willing to be bullied, the people who will just go along with it. If we could shift that balance, then I think we could make a very successful human world, which would be a sustainable environment for all of the beasts and bugs and other things that live around us, with the exception of the mosquitoes, the tsetse flies, the dengue people.
I share your optimistic outlook towards the future. I think that we're in a midst of some form of an awakening. I don't know how to describe it.
The dawning of the cage of aquariums.
Yes, exactly. So, and it's interesting in the sense, how much friendship has played into my healing process of, from this whole kind of authoritarian control group experience, because I know initially I really battled with this idea. Like when I finally come to grips with the fact that, oh my God, yes, I've been in a cult. It's not even a special cult. It's like it's stereotypical, check every box in Steve Hazard's book cult. Like, all this idea of specialness that is all going out the window. And so even though I had to accept and swallow this pill of that I had basically been on some level conned and taken down this path through manipulation, all that sort of thing, I still struggle because I'm like, okay, I can now see it was all largely a load of bullshit. But I did think I was going to go save the world. I thought I was going to be involved in this thing that was going to really make this impact. How is anything in comparison to that, even though that was a delusion, how is anything going to ever make me excited or get me enthusiastic when it took something that on that scale to get me excited? How am I ever going to get excited again? It's like, I can't just go flip burgers at McDonald's. That's not going to, what am I going to do? And ultimately, it was going through the process of recognizing that I would want to fight the battles that I feel I could directly impact. Yeah. And so with that, when I really came to grips of what that meant to me, it meant exactly what you've been describing, investing myself and looking out for those friendships that I really, and the people I cared about in life, like take the time to invest and see, the impact that I can have by treating people with the exact traits that you just described, with that respect, concern, kindness, and all those sort of things. And that anything creative that I did that I could directly kind of impact through this lens I now had, I felt that was just another way to kind of, kind of be true to myself in that way. And that has really become the focus of my life, which has become something like you're describing, very satisfying. Like, I don't want to go out and save the world. I don't think the world particularly needs saving, really. I think that's probably one of the big problems. And luckily, I'm not even remotely in the position to have any impact to do that anyway. So it seems like, the people that are in that position aren't people I'd want to associate with in the first place, because you're talking about the billionaires or the massive politicians or whatever. Like that's not a crowd I want to hang out with. So it's been so interesting to be kind of have gone through this journey where I swallowed that hook of thinking, oh, you're going to be involved with something that's going to really impact the world, and realizing I'll leave that to somebody else. I care about my friends, my family, and my projects, and that's allowed me to have a real peace of mind. And people have commented. They said, it's so amazing that you're just not bitter. And I've said, listen, I'm grateful for this experience. I mean, this experience gave me not only a focus, but it gave me also a passion to discover what, really I feel like, I can actually do here that will be fulfilling and satisfying on some level. And if I hadn't gone through it, I think I'd probably still be looking. And so it really kind of worked out for the best. It was a lot of fun, at times. I call it the School of Hard Knocks. And I took some pretty expensive courses, as I know you did, which, but I don't regret, because the life lessons that it taught me are priceless. And so if I had to do it again, I would. And if this is what it took to get here, so be it. And I think that it really allows me to kind of be at peace with a lot of the stuff that happened that, like you said, if I just focused on it and only that, it probably would do me almost more harm than good.
Yeah. And I think it is the attitudes and the behaviors that we develop that are part of the evolution of the human race, that if we can live decent lives, and if we can live authentically, and really mean what we're saying, then that can lead to transformation in society, and anything else will lead to stultification and devastation. And so, but it's not just trying to love everybody or some pleasant hippie sort of idea. Right. It is actually thinking about things, questioning things, and being willing to stand up, being willing to do something, and how we behave. One reflection that among my friends now is a man who spent 20 years harassing me, Mike Rinder.
Yeah.
And he's a great guy, what can I say?
No, he seems like a great guy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it shows that somebody, that change occurs, that there can be a positive change, an evolution of behavior. And if we can be part of that, I mean, I tend towards the view that we are threads in a tapestry, not that we are permanent beings of any kind. But I think it for me, it's incredibly important what every individual does, because we have this branch of evolution that's called symbolic evolution or cultural transmission, whereby we can actually genetically change because of epigenetics. That genes are not read-only, we can write on them. And that comes from language, symbolism, the fact that as a species, we have something that the cetaceans don't have, that the whales don't have. We have a developed language, which we can then record and we can pass on. So our memory is not memory of one individual, it's the memory of the whole of our culture. And that is now accessible. And the value of being in friendship with the world and with people becomes, it means if I'm in trouble, there are people who help me. And if you're in trouble, I'll help you. And it's that simple, and that's being pro-social, that's being civilized about things, I like to think. So this has been great, as usual. Yeah, and we're even better friends now than we were at the beginning.
We certainly are. No, and I think it's not a relationship to take lightly. I mean, I like I said, going back to the boys' school, I take friendship very seriously, and I'm very grateful to have your friendship. And it's one of these things that those are the treasures I hold on to in life more than anything. And so I'm very grateful for that.
And we'd ask anybody who's watching this to join in, to write something in the comments below, correct anything. I think I said I didn't say sybaritic when I meant to say it earlier on, so I'd just like to put that in case anybody noticed. I did. Oh dear. Somebody who wants a life of luxury, a sybarite. We're here to teach what we've learned, but we're here to learn from what you've learned as well. And please spread these ideas if you think they're valuable. Add to them, contribute, correct us, ask questions, all of these good things. And we shall be a community of friends, which is as it should be. So thank you very much indeed, Hoyt. See you again soon.
Great to see you, John. All the best.
Yeah. Cheers.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.
The dawning of the cage of aquariums.
Yes, exactly.